You will have to talk something now in the video, then only I will know.
Yeah, it says you're live. Hello. Hello. All good?
I'll have to cut this call and I'll text you.
Yeah. Sure. 6 minutes. Hello. All right. So can you hear me? Am I audible, visible? Okay. So suppose we are audible. Okay. I'll start. All right. Hello, everyone. Today we are looking at vocabulary. Well, vocabulary is a bit of a tricky subject when it comes to the verbal ability part. Well, the cat has gotten rid of direct vocabulary questions, but it's not that they're not testing you on vocabulary. It's just that they've become a bit crafty. It's not direct questions anymore. What they're likely to do is they are likely to give you uh, a different way of. It's just a different way of testing. So within a paragraph, a vocabulary is required to understand the paragraphs as well, understand the questions, options, everything. And within the paragraph, they might ask you a question from a particular section of the RC where there may be a very complicated word. And without understanding that word, it may perhaps be very difficult to get the answer right. And the other way is you can always embed these words in the options, and therefore you find it hard to understand the option, and then you're sort of shooting in the dark, right? So these are some of the crafty ways that they've come up with in terms of applying vocabulary. So vocabulary is essentially become a reasoning plus vocabulary question, right? It's not direct. So that means that vocab preparation still has to happen. It's not that you can simply just get rid of it, but you can also approach it in a different way, because it's not necessary for the cat to ask you a direct question. However, there are other exams where you do find direct vocabulary questions, or at least direct adjacent, right? In terms of context. So, well, there's the standard way of preparing for vocabulary. What you pick up the dictionary and you go A, B, C, D, E, and you just do the whole thing. But it's not only is it pretty much impractical, but it is really boring, right? It's not a good way to prepare for vocabulary, or for that matter, right? So how do you still prepare for vocabulary, still prepare for the exam? One of the ways that we look at vocabulary is we try to understand the words from context, right? Context often gives us enough clues to understand what the word is, right? Like, the job is to arrive at the answer. It's not necessary to arrive at the exact meaning, right? I have to arrive at an understanding of the sentence, understanding of the paragraph, understanding of the RC. I have to identify within context the right option that I'm looking for. It's not necessary that I have to come up with the exact meaning of the word. So as much help, if I know the meaning, it's great, it'll help me. But if I don't, what do I do in that situation? How do I approach it? All right. So context is very important. And the other idea that we'll look at today is etymology. These are the two concepts that we'll be looking at. Now, one of the other approaches is when we say identifying context, identifying vocabulary. One of the things that is very common question is, well, then where do I start? How do I start about it? Now, one of the approaches that I believe is really useful is instead of going, in an alphabetical order, what you can do is you can try going back and looking at some of the exams. You can look at the past CAT papers and you can check what are the domains from which these words, or what are the domains from in which these RCs are, right? So philosophy, biology, anthropology, economics, all of these domains. So what we can do is we can go from domain to domain instead of focusing on alphabetical order or any other sequential order, right? So that's what you can do. So a lot of words belong to specific ideas, and often they are the ones that really complicate the matter and it becomes really hard to understand. So the approach that I've taken for this session is I will be using a particular concept, and in that concept I will be taking you through a bunch of words within that concept, and from these words we will see how they are used in particular context, and we will try to derive the meanings of these words from that context. All right, so let's begin. Let's start. Vocabulary in context. This will be the main agenda today. We will try as best as possible to be a little bit, do a little bit of a detective work. All right. So the first word that we have today, I've sequenced them from a difficulty standpoint. It goes from easy to a bit hard. All right. So let's start with something easy. Mutiny. All right. Most of you have heard this word, right? So the word is here. I'll give you a paragraph, I'll read it out, and I'll try to get the meaning of the word from the paragraph that is given. Right, let's read. In 1857, Indian soldiers of the British East India Company rebelled after being forced to use cartridges greased with animal fat offensive to their faith. Okay, so this is providing me with some context. So there, what has happened in 1857? Indian soldiers of the British East India Company, they did a rebellion. Why? Because they were forced to use cartridges greased with animal fat, which was offensive to their faith. What began as refusal soon escalated. So initially, it was just a refusal. Okay, just a minute. Yeah, initially it was just a refusal, but soon it escalated. So from refusal, escalation, troops turned on their officers and seized control of garrisons. This sudden mutiny spread quickly, threatening British authority across northern India. Okay, so here is my word. Okay, and this says this sudden mutiny. All right, so whatever this is has to be defining mutiny, right? This sudden mutiny. And then it says it spread quickly, threatening British authority across northern India. Okay, that's what it's saying. So something definitely for the British India, at least negative at that point, right? For us, quite a positive thing. All right. So how do I then understand what this is? Okay. Refusal, escalation. Escalation of refusal by the troops turning on their officers and seizing control of garrisons. What is the action that has taken place? The action that has taken place is a bunch of troops turned on their officers, went against their officers, and seized control of garrisons. This action is being termed as mutiny. Therefore, what would I understand? What understanding do I get about the word? I understand that troops or soldiers or some individuals belonging to a particular group, right, turning on their seniors and doing something which they are not supposed to do, turning on their seniors and indulging in an act of defiance to defy their seniors and do something. That is what mutiny is probably. right? Let's take a look at the etymology of the word. And etymology is basically sort of say the history of where the word comes from and how the roots are involved in creating the final word. Okay, so the word mutiny comes from the Latin version movere, to move, which evolved through Middle French mutiner. So mutiner, this Latin word comes from this word, which means to revolt or to rebel, and this word means to move. Before entering English in the 16th century, so the word enters English in the 16th century. Origins are from French to Latin, then to English. Now, the thing is, these are very important things to remember. Every time you try to pick up a word, uh, don't just look at the meaning and just be done with it. It's very easy to forget words that way. Invest some time, try to learn its history, where it comes from, what are the roots, right? This might be very important when you encounter a word that you have no clue about. You encounter a word you have no clue about, and then suddenly you remember a etymology that you may have perhaps read for some other word, and you are maybe able to eliminate the options and get to the right option. This can be useful, extremely useful. So one of the ways that we understand these things when we really have no other option is maybe we can figure out the words from the etymology. All right. So this is the meaning. Mutiny refers to an open rebellion against lawful authority, most often by soldiers or sailors against their commanding officers. It suggests a collapse of discipline and loyalty, turning a controlled group into a force of resistance. Unlike a simple protester, mutiny carries the sense of organized defiance and direct confrontation with leadership, usually within a rigid hierarchy. Okay, what is happening? Let me just erase this. It refers to an open rebellion against lawful authority. Rebellion going against lawful authority. What was the lawful authority? The British India, East India, right? Most often by soldiers, but it can also be referred to any kind of hierarchical system. Within officers also, you can have mutiny against their commanding officers, right? It suggests a collapse of discipline and loyalty. It is discipline and loyalty have to collapse for people with lower down the hierarchy to go against their seniors, right? Turning a controlled group, usually controlled groups are engaged in mutiny, into a force of resistance. Unlike a simple protest or strike, this is different. It's not just it can't be termed as a protest or strike. These differences are important. These differences can help you identify the correct option and the from the wrong options, right? Mutiny carries the sense of organized defiance. Now, if we go back to our example, what was the situation? Seizing control of garrisons. Now, seizing control of garrisons would have required a lot of coordination and would require some kind of organization, right? It wouldn't just happen, right? So that is also a part of whatever mutiny, action of mutiny that you're doing. And direct confrontation with leadership, usually within a rigid hierarchy. That is what mutiny means. All right. A fair bit can be gathered from the example that we have seen. All right. Next, conspiracy. All right. In 1605, a group of English Catholics secretly plotted to blow up Parliament and kill King James I. This covert plan, remembered as the gunpowder plot, was a notorious conspiracy. So this covert plan is the conspiracy, right? This covert plan, remembered as the gunpowder plot, was a notorious conspiracy that nearly changed the course of English history. How do I get the meaning, right? Conspiracy. This covert plan. So first thing that tells me is it's a covert plan. Covert meaning secret, right? So secret plan. What happened? In some time, a group of people, English Catholics, a group of people secretly, covert, secret, plot to blow up the parliament. A group of people secretly plotted to do something, go against the king in this case, do something dangerous, massive, and again in a sense of defiance against a hierarchy, a kingdom, or the king, right? That's the sense that I'm getting. Conspiracy. And these are covert. So, what are the features that I understand about the word so far? A group of people, secret planning, that's involved, um, and going against a senior hierarchy, right? So, that is what I understand from the example so far given. What is the etymology of the word? It comes from Latin, to breathe together, to agree in secret, conspire, which means to breathe together or to agree in secret. Combining con, which is a very commonly used, commonly seen root, right? So these are called what we call as roots. So very commonly seen root, which means together, and spirit, which means to breathe. This is where it comes from, and the modern English version is conspiracy. So together and breathe, spirit. So this can be crucial, maybe a very complicated word sometimes, and you realize, okay, I've seen this in conspiracy, it means to breathe. Therefore, maybe you can eliminate the options given in the question. All right, let's take a look at the meaning. A conspiracy is a secret agreement. Okay, yeah, we figured this out. Agreement, plot, secretly plotting, agreeing to do something between individuals, the English Catholics in this case, individuals, to carry out an unlawful or harmful act. Blowing up the parliament, killing the king, both unlawful and quite harmful, right? It emphasizes, what are the features of it? It emphasizes secrecy. There is a lot of planning involved and coordination. Blowing up the parliament would not just happen, right? Distinguishing it from open rebellion. So when I say these are the things which distinguish it from open rebellion, then open rebellion is the pretty much the opposite, right? So open rebellion is something which is out on the street, right? It is openly done, right? While an insurrection is visible in the streets, a conspiracy brews in hidden rooms. We'll look at this word later. It's a very interesting word, insurrection. We'll look at this later. A conspiracy brews in hidden rooms. Now, if so far you haven't really figured out, well, we are looking at acts of revolution, acts of defiance. That is the concept that we have today for you. Um, Basically, everything to do with war, not necessarily war, violence, conspiracies, overthrowing governments, those kind of things. That is the concept that we're looking at. And these are some of the most common words that you will find within that domain. All right. So, secret agreement carried out by a bunch of individuals as which is a unlawful or harmful act. What are the features? Secrecy, planning, coordination, and that's what makes it different from a open rebellion which is out in the streets. All right. Insurrections are visible in the streets. Conspiracy is done in hidden rooms. Conspiracies have to be hidden. They can't really be out in the open. All right. Next word, authoritarianism. It's a fairly common word, something that a lot of most people would have heard, right? Let's take a look at the precise nature of the word. All right, so the statement, in the 20th century, Francisco Franco's rule in Spain exemplified authoritarianism. Exemplified was a perfect example of authoritarianism as political freedoms were curtailed. So, what do I understand? In the 20th century, Franco's rule in Spain was a typical example of authoritarianism. So, whatever happened, which is going to be described here, whatever happened during this rule of Franco, right, is going to be the textbook definition of authoritarianism. That's what the paragraph is saying. Whatever is happening, whatever I'm going to define that happened in Franco's rule is the textbook definition of authoritarianism, because it says exemplified, was a typical example of authoritarianism. What happened? Political freedoms were curtailed, held back, reduced. Dissent was suppressed. Dissent was not allowed. All right. And power remained concentrated in the hands of a single ruler. So, what are the features? No political freedom, or very reduced political freedom, not no political freedom. That's a different word, actually. We'll look at that as well. Political freedom was reduced significantly. Dissent was suppressed. Any kind of opposing voice was stopped, and power remained. All of the power is concentrated within a single ruler. A single ruler keeps all of the power. The Nazi party was a great example of authoritarianism as well, right? So that those are the features of authoritarianism. Okay, where does the word come from? It comes from authority, which is rooted in Latin. It means influence and command. Auctoritas, which means influence or command. That's the Latin root. This is a Latin root combined with the suffix ism, denoting a system or practice. This is again very important. The moment you see ism, some attached to something, you should know that it's basically talking about a system or a practice. All right. So authority comes from auctoritas and ism, right? That's the origin of the word. Next, we have the meaning itself. Authoritarianism describes a system of government. So Franco's rule, right? Franco's rule, thereby a system of government. It was a system of government. It is character. What are its characteristics? Strong central power. All of the power was with Franco. And limited political freedom. There was not a lot of political freedom. It emphasizes obedience to authority over individual rights. The priority is to give value to obedience to the rule rather than individual rights, often rejecting democratic. So we saw that there was a lot of reduction in political autonomy of the individuals, right? Unlike totalitarianism. Now, this is a different word. So, unlike totalitarianism, different from totalitarianism, how? It may allow limited social or economic freedoms, but denies real political opposition. So, there are some freedoms that you may still have. In totalitarianism, therefore, we can infer that there is almost no social or economic freedom, but denies real political opposition. So, no real political opposition. It does allow, however, for some kind of limited social or economic freedoms. All right, that's how it is different from totalitarianism. All right, let's take a look at the next word, faction, not fraction, it's faction. During the French Revolution, the Jacobins and the Girondins clashed bitterly in the National Convention, each faction. So, during the French Revolution, during a certain time, okay, there are two groups that are talking about, the Jacobins and the Girondins, clashed bitterly in the National Convention. Two groups clashed somewhere, so they had a fight. Each faction, so these two groups are therefore being referred to as the faction, right? So each faction claimed to represent the true revolutionary spirit. Yet their rivalry deepened political divisions and fueled violence. Okay, so how exactly am I supposed to gather what faction means from here? Two groups. So faction, from what I understand, is groups. But within what? Within this entire thing is highly political, right? From everything is talking about politics. Okay, so National Convention of some political influence. Okay, these two groups both represent the true revolutionary spirit. So they're both claiming to represent the same thing, yet they have a rivalry. So they're both part, from what I understand here, is they're both part of the same larger group. And within a larger group, they have differences, right? That's what this is. From this, I understand that these two groups are part of a larger group. And within those two, within that larger group, there are two groups which differ in opinion. They both claim to be the true representatives of revolutionary spirit. So, yet their rivalry deepened political divisions and fueled violence. So often, their clashes can have very dark and deep ramifications, political divisions, and a lot of violence can occur. Okay, so let's take a look where it comes from. The etymology is okay. Factio is the word, a group acting together. Interesting. So factio meaning a group acting together. It comes from facer, to do or make, entering English via Old French. So it comes from French, then goes into English. Factio and facer is how the word has moved, basically transition to eventually become faction. Okay, let's take a look at the meaning. Right, a faction is a smaller organized group within a larger body. It is a group within a larger body, often united by a specific agenda. They have a specific agenda within the larger organization or belief. While not always violent, factions can destabilize institutions by pushing competing interests. So within a larger organization, if you have two groups which are fighting, there can always be cracks, and that's what this part is talking about, leading to conflict or fragmentation within governments, parties, or movements. So the word is highly limited to um, governments, parties, or movements, right? So within these groups, you have some political ideology is what brings them together, and within that, there may be individual ideologies that may be a problem. Okay. Next up, we have ethnic cleansing. Let's take a look. In the 1990s, during the Bosnian War, entire communities of Bosniaks were driven from their homes through forced displacement, mass killings, and systematic terror. This campaign of ethnic cleansing sought to remove certain populations from contested territories to create areas dominated by one ethnic group. Okay, what is happening? We are talking about the Bosnian War. During the Bosnian War, what has happened? Communities of Bosniaks were driven from their homes. They were driven from their homes through forced displacement, mass killings, and systematic terror. These were the things that happened. Forced displacement, mass killings, and systematic terror led to Bosniaks being driven away from their homes. And that is being referred to as this campaign of ethnic cleansing. Therefore, the meaning of ethnic cleansing, which you can see from here, is this campaign. What is this campaign? This campaign is this forced displacement, mass killing, and systematic terror driving the Bosniaks away. That is what the campaign is, and therefore, my understanding of ethnic cleansing is moving an ethnic group, a group, away from their home through killings, displacement, and using all kinds of terror activities to do that. Right? Let's take a look where the word comes from. Etymology. The term combines ethnic, it uses ethnic, comes from, okay, sorry. All right. The term combines ethnic, okay, ethnic meaning group, from which comes from ethnos, meaning nation or people, with cleansing, which comes from Old English cleansion, to purge, to make clean. Though both words are much older, the phrase ethnic cleansing emerged in the late 20th century, particularly during the conflicts in former Yugoslavia. So, these two words are quite old. Ethnic and cleansing are quite old, but the phrase, this is a phrase, right? This phrase itself came during the late 20th century during conflicts in former Yugoslavia, what is known as former Yugoslavia. All right. So that is the origin of the word. Let's take a look at the meaning. Okay. Ethnic cleansing refers to the deliberate. So the action is deliberate, right? You want those people to move. You want that ethnic group to move away from their homes. And systematic. It's systematic because it's not just a single act. You want an entire ethnic group to move to another place. You have to do a lot of acts and they have to be coordinated and towards a particular goal, right? Of a particular ethnic, religious, or cultural group from a specific territory. You want to move these people from a particular group of people from the place where they are to another place. All right. Often through violence, intimidation, or forced migration. We saw that deportation, mass killings, so systematic acts of terror were all involved. Unlike genocide, so how does it differ from genocide? Genocide is mass cleaning, right? Which aims at the complete destruction of a people, right? So the Holocaust is a great example of a genocide, right? So it was aimed at complete destruction of the Jews. Ethnic cleansing focuses on expulsion and exclusion. So this is not wiping out an entire population. This is basically transporting them to a different place. You don't want them around you, basically. All right. Though the methods used can overlap and be equally devastating. People are not really going to just move like that, right? So often the methods that are used for genocide are similar in nature to what they're used in ethnic cleansing, right? So words are may not be close, but the actions within those words are quite similar, right? Mass killings, deportation, all of those things are also part of genocide as well. All right, though the intention may be different, not the same. Next, like I said, insurrection is something that we'll look at. It's a great word, insurrection. Let's take a look. In 1791, enslaved people, okay, what is the group? Enslaved people in Saint Domingue rose up against their colonial masters, burning plantations and seizing weapons. So this is, when you look at it, quite similar so far to mutiny, right? A group of people rose up against the colonial masters, burning plantations and seizing weapons. Okay. What began as scattered resistance, now, this is where it is differing. Scattered resistance. Mutiny was not scattered. Mutiny was very precise. Seizing of garrisons, organized, seized, right, grew into a massive insurrection that ultimately toppled French rule and gave birth to Haiti, the first independent Black republic. So, a small, what scattered resistance still happening here and there, right? Here and there, and not very big, grew into a massive insurrection. So what that tells me is the scale of insurrection is huge. Why? It led to the birth of of a nation. The birth of a nation cannot happen in isolation. It has to be a massive movement for that to happen. So therefore, the scope and scale is quite big. The other thing that tells me is, if the scale is that big, it cannot really be precisely monitored and organized, right? It has to happen quite organically. So that is what has happened. It became scattered. There was scattered resistance, and it just sort of has like an avalanche effect, and it becomes an insurrection, and it gives birth to the nation of Haiti. Okay, let's take a look at the etymology. Okay, it comes from insurgere, okay, which means to rise up, rising up, combining in, which means against. Again, this could be quite important. In meaning against, and surger to rise, rise against, therefore, later entering Middle English through Old French. Okay, so from Latin, the word goes to Old French, and from Old French, it finally goes to Middle English. All right. So to rise up is insurgere is to rise up in Latin. In is against, and surger is. So this is a Latin word. These are the Latin roots that we have. Okay, against and rise against. Okay. What is the meaning? An insurrection is a violent uprising against established authority. Why? Masters, colonial masters, established authority, right? This is an established authority, as established as it can get. Violent uprising, burning of plantations, all those things, they are not peaceful, right? Violent uprising against established authority, often involving a large segment of the population, often involving large segment, massive insurrection, right? It has to be a great number of people. It differs from mutiny in scale. Mutiny was seizure of barracks, garrisons. Scale is very low. Insurrection, the scale is really, really big, as it extends beyond soldiers or sailors to also involve civilians and the wider society, aiming to overthrow or destabilize political power. So the aim is also much grander, right? So that is what insurrection is. All right. So we have so far looked at a number of words, right? Try to understand how these words and their um, etymology, how to get the meaning of these words from the context in which they are being used, right? And also looked at the nuance, what the precise nature of the words, how they may slightly differ from each other. Now, that is something which is very important. Some of the most difficult questions that you will encounter in vocabulary will be something like that, where you will have very close words, right? They may be very close in terms of your reading itself. You may probably think they're very similar because they may interchangeably used in some cases, but they have specific differences within them which are important to identify for you when you're preparing or when simply even when you're reading. You need to know how these words differ from each other and when to use which, right? So these differences, learning these differences can be just as important as identifying the meaning from context. All right. And etymology is particularly useful when I have no other resort, right? I really don't know the meaning. The meaning of the word eludes me. I have no clue what it is. Then I try understanding it from context. But what if even context is not there or not enough for me to understand? Then I have to resort to etymology, right? It can help me out, help me figure out the word. All right. So see the way you approach it. You do enough reading to get to encounter enough words, learn the meaning of the words. But even when you learn the meaning of the word, don't just look at the dictionary, be done with it. Try to understand the word, try to see how these words are used in different contexts, right? Mutiny, for example, is a very commonly used word for uh, any kind of uprising against seniority or hierarchy, often used in context of office also. While the word's meaning is sort of limited to soldiers, it is not really used in just that context. It can be used in different contexts as well. All right. So it's important for you to understand how these words can be used in within different contexts. All right. And then to understand how the word originates. And for that, you need to get into the roots, where it comes from, and all those things that can be really, really helpful in identifying the nature of the word. Sometimes even the original language of the word can be very helpful in finally nailing down the meaning. All right. And then, well, context, as much context as you can get within the context. How do I take these clues that are helping me understand the meaning as best as I can? Well, those are the tricks that you can use. for vocabulary, and I really suggest every time you are reading uh, to not just instantly look for the meaning. Open up your dictionary. Don't just right away open up your dictionary or open up your phone and check the meaning. I would say give it some time. Try to read it as a whole text and see if you can figure it out, and then look at the meaning. And again, like I said, don't just stop at the meaning. Try looking at the other aspects of the word as well, and synonyms. What are the close words that can be there, right? And the last thing, well, when you're approaching vocabulary, don't just one of the boring ways is to just go sequentially in terms of alphabets. I would really suggest pick certain topics, certain domains which are very commonly used in the cat, and from there you can try to gather some of the commonly used words in those topics. All right, so that should really help you with your vocab prep. Thank you for joining me today.